As speaker bios have been distributed to everyone, I won't provide much of an introduction, but Mr. Raj Sawhney, a dear friend of the foundation, is chair of Bennett Jones's India Committee, and his firm Bennett Jones has been a generous supporter of our foundation's work, given the depth of their expertise in Asia. And Ms. Ghosh, who was introduced to us by Mr. Raj Sawhney, is not only a leading corporate lawyer in India, but as you will note from her bio, has been awarded and recognized for generous contributions to D&I efforts. I'm sure that Raj will add to my brief introduction of Ms. Ghosh, but we have a great tag team today to brief and advise you. After the presentations, we'll have a Q&A session, so please post your questions, as I said, in the chat box. And with no further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you, Raj, so take it on.
Thanks very much, Christine. Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. As Christine mentioned, I head up the firm's India committee at Bennett Jones, but our focus is really inbound investment from India into Canada because we are Canadian lawyers. So we help Indian companies establish in Canada and expand their footprint into Canada. And while Canada and India have certain similarities, both are based on English common law. They're both democracies. In fact, India is the world's largest democracy, and English is the preferred language for business and contract. So there are certainly similarities which are very helpful in terms of doing business for Canadians doing business in India and Indian companies doing business in Canada. There are very significant differences, of course, as well. So it's a real pleasure to have Kasturi join us today. Trilegal is one of India's most reputable, well-known firms, particularly for business and corporate and commercial activities. I personally have been doing work with Trilegal over the last 15 years. And Kasturi and I have known each other, I think now for 10 years, although I look a lot older and Kasturi hasn't aged. So, but we have known each other for about 10 years, and Kasturi has been very, very helpful to our clients who are going over to India and doing business, and also on very complex matters involving Indian law. So I'm very glad Kasturi is able to join us today and give us a primer on doing business in India with her direct experience as an Indian lawyer. Kasturi, over to you. Looking forward to your conversation.
Thank you, Raj. You're far too kind. I think the 2 years of the pandemic will show that my hair has grayed quite a bit. But anyway, good morning to all of you, and a big thank you to Christine as well. Doing work in India is a complex affair. I do have some slides. I will share screen. And I'm just doing that right now. I presume it's visible to everyone? Okay, so just to get started, I will be happy to share these slides, because like I was saying, there is a lot when it comes to doing business in India. The regulations in India are complicated, as Raj was saying. Of course, we have also learned a lot of our legal traditions from the UK, so the similarities do exist. But let me get started, and I will certainly circulate the slides here, because I will not be able to capture all of these matters in the next 20 minutes. So let me put out some key drivers that has fueled our growth story. And if any of you have been to India, you've probably seen the population of our country. It is still the youngest and will continue to be the youngest till 2030. And the way the composition of the population is that the middle class is significantly large in India, and has consistently been growing over the course of the years. So the amount of spend, the demand which India has been able to provide to the world at large has been extremely competitive. It is bolstered by the fact that education in India has led to many engineers and doctors and various types of service professionals over the course of the years. In the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen the whole world of startup become very, very exciting. India has grown rapidly, in this particular matter. We have 44 unicorns as on date, and the number just keeps on growing. If I look at the deal activity in the last year alone, I mean, these numbers are quite staggering. We did not expect, when the pandemic hit us in March of 2020, that we would really see a recovery of any kind. But frankly, the deal value and the deal activity has been tremendous. It's kept us lawyers extremely busy, of course, but more importantly, it has really shown the resilience of the Indian economy. Even though many sectors have, of course, been quite affected, you will note that the number of sectors which took the benefit of the revised way of working, the revised way of dealing with people, they really saw a large chunk of the funding. Just given the fact that we know a lot of the cohort is into edtech and health tech, here are a few points that I think will be of interest to you. The kind of money that we raised in 2021 in the edtech sector was $4.7 billion US. 6 unicorns exist in India, most of which were added in the last year. The focus on education in India is tremendous. Anyone who's ever had a friend who was from India will tell you how we as parents always want our kids to work extremely hard in school and to go to college and to keep learning. I mean, that's one of the things that the parents in India spend a lot of money on. So this of course bolstered by the fact that schools were forced to be shut down, they had to adapt to new ways of functioning, has led to a very big marked improvement in the way in which education is driven. And a lot of this is not just in urban India. The thing that excites people like me is that we're able to take using edtech, we're able to take schooling to children in tier 3, tier 4 cities. And we really do hope that, given the way the market has improved, given the amount of funding which has come into this sector, this should reach rural India very, very quickly. Moving on very quickly to healthcare, again, received a lion's share of the funding that we raised in 2021. We have seen over 3,000 startups, and really this was a sector which took off. I mean, there was a lot of work that was, of course, going on in this space for since 2015, 2016. But there were very many gray issues around the delivery of healthcare, over video, over the phone, and things like that. Also, there were a lot of questions around whether you could have an online pharmacy set up in the first place or not. But given what happened during the pandemic, given the absolute dire need which people started to feel because of issues around not being able to go visit a doctor, doctors not having adequate time, because in India, unfortunately, the doctor to patient ratio is 1:10,000. So for 10,000 people in India, there is only one doctor. So given all these kinds of issues, what we began to see is that the government started to come up with the regulations around, making it clear that you could have an online pharma company. You could have a doctor giving advice or consultation over the phone or the video. And then, of course, you started to see a lot more, the devices like implantables and, cuffs and sensors and various such matters actually, become part and parcel of our everyday life. So again, a huge boost, a huge wave, I think that's come over India in the context of dealing with not just healthcare in the context of reacting to it, but also, thinking about health and wellness as an important factor to spend one's wallet on. So these two sectors certainly have seen a very big change. If I come into the regulatory sector and the landscape, like Raj said, we are a common law country. We are a quasi-federal structure, which basically means the center and the state, both have certain sections which they focus on. So, for instance, the federal, the center makes laws on corporations, on antitrust, on exchange control, on taxation, on IP and matters like that. Whereas the state is responsible for subjects like real estate, labor, the indirect tax matters, and things like that. Now, what this means for anyone who is coming to do business in India is that you not only have to watch out for the laws which are set up by the center, but if you were to set up, your office in two different states, you would have to ensure that compliance with regard to labor law or indirect taxes is carried out at both levels. So therefore, this poses a little bit of a difference between how each state government kind of deals with their particular matter. But certainly that is something to watch out for. India as a country believes in the rule of law, and certainly, we have seen this play out over and over again with regard to foreigners who have invested in India, have always been treated without any kind of bias in front of our courts. If I quickly jump into the modes of coming into India, one could of course establish what are called liaison project offices or branch offices, but these are typically not the the solutions one would use if one is looking to set up on a long-term basis. Then one would look at setting up a joint venture. Of course, that would depend on if you have a partner in India or if you don't. If you don't, of course, you can always go in for a wholly owned subsidiary. You could also set up an LLP now, and this again has been one of the newer newer manners of which one can set up a business entity here, much easier than setting up a company. So in that context, certainly important to keep in mind. If I go into exchange control now, this is actually one of the more complicated laws. And here, there are various aspects to exchange control in India. For instance, it is important to remember that the rupee is convertible 100% on the current account, which basically means that in order to pay for goods and services, there is really no issue with convertibility of the rupee. But on capital account matters like ownership of shares, issuance of debt, provision of a guarantee, all of those are a lot more restricted. So for instance, we have a very strict rule in terms of the sectors in which FDI money can come in. There are a list of sectors where no FDI is allowed. But over the course of the years, and I'm talking now from 1991, when the economy was finally opened, the number of sectors actually which have been difficult to put money in, or which have been highly controlled, those have really dwindled. So over the course of the years, that is something that that we have seen change. And so now the number of sectors where there is some kind of a restriction has really boiled down to seven to eight. Now within the sectors where FDI can come in, there are really two important things to note. One is, of course, that if FDI is allowed up to 100% in the automatic route, then there is no need for consent. But in some cases, like for instance, FDI in the pharmaceutical space, anything over 74% needs the approval of the government of India. So one, of course, needs to understand exactly the sector in which one is wanting to participate. And then, then we will be guided by that in order to understand whether the approvals are needed or they're not. The approval, the process does take some time. And that's something that I will generally say for India as a place which is different, or it's something that you need to pay attention to, that things in India take time to get done. And I'm saying this, fully knowing that, that a lot of my clients do get sometimes quite upset that, it takes a long time to get an approval or to get a license and things like that. But that is the nature of the beast. Now, the ground reality is that, that people like to file 4 forms, and want you to sign in green pen and red pen and things like that. But and that's why we are always here to help our clients make sure that they understand the entire process. We, and we explain to them that here are the places where we could potentially get questions, and here are the ways to deal with that particular matter. In terms of the corporate law, as I was explaining, we have the ability to set up a private company. We have the ability to set up an LLP. It's very much along the lines of what your Corporations Act has. So, I will not spend a lot of time around that, because the principles are quite the same. On taxation, there is of course the taxation which is on the direct side, and now there is taxation which is GST on the indirect side, and that is something that has really been a sea change for us here. While of course it's a complicated structure because of the manner in which the tax slabs have been brought into the regime, but it is certainly one of our biggest tax reforms in India to date. Because if you've ever done work in India earlier, and I'm sure Raj can attest to this, the number of indirect taxes that we would have to account for were tremendous. Each state had its own set of taxes and its own set of ways of monitoring it. So at least now with the GST having come into the fore, the manner in which it is processed has become the same. Although each state does continue to have certain share of the GST, as well as certain minor matters that they look into. We have an antitrust law. It's quite similar to the UK law, and once again, the larger issues that we look at as corporate lawyers are of course matters in relation to the thresholds for a combination, which is basically, if you were to do a deal in India, which is an M&A deal or a share sale, would you really have to make an application to the antitrust authority here, who is known as the CCI. Now, there are various levels of exceptions which have been built in. But this is a regulator that, that one really needs to understand well, because they have become very active over the course of the years. And given that many deals in India are now going to the CCI for their consent, they have become very proactive in trying to understand the deals, in trying to understand how how the actual effect of the merger or the combination is going to be. So, if ever you have to make an application, again, the same point I made earlier, please expect a lot of questions. Please expect to provide, a lot of detail and information to them, because this is a regulator that really does like to ask a lot of questions. Of course, we do have our own Prevention of Corruption Act. It's basically dealing with the bribery or corruption of an official. It is certainly an act that has some teeth. But having said that, we are cognizant of the fact that bribery, is something that is commonplace in India. And another thing to be mindful of in the context of, procurement of licenses, when you are dealing with the authorities, one must be very clear and transparent about the client's own rules and the policies. So multinational companies, they basically have a lot of training, and that's something that's very important, and you must also bear that in mind, because policies and practices are always then called into question if there are issues here. In the context of the dispute resolution, again, what we typically see in India is that, of course, there are courts, but really the method to resolve disputes that has gained a lot of traction over the course of the years is our arbitration. And what has happened now over the last three years is that the Arbitration Act has been amended several times over, because there was a lot of unwanted court interventions and various things like that. So now the new law says that all the arbitrations have to be completed within a year. I think we are the only country in the world that has a timeline by which it must be completed. Of course, there is an extension that is possible by 6 + 6 months, but that is extremely rare. So so typically most of the arbitrators are conscious about ensuring that all arbitrations that happen in India are closed in a timely fashion. Of course, when it comes to looking at institutional arbitration, ICC, SIAC in Singapore, these are all very well known to the companies in India, and a lot of times is actually seen as the chosen means of actually closing these disputes out. Again, in the context of labor laws, this is something that that we have seen change over the course of the years. But we still continue to remain a very employee-friendly country. Lastly, I think the most important thing when you deal with India is to look at the culture here. We in India, love to negotiate, and we negotiate slowly. So for those of you who are looking to do a contract here or to do a joint venture here, building trust is really the most important factor. There's a lot of emphasis on understanding the counterparty, understanding sometimes their families and what they do. So so it's a slow cooking. so to speak. So, that's something that I will always ask you to keep in mind. And Indian, negotiators or counterparties don't always say what they mean. So sometimes you kind of have to remove the chaff from the grain in order to understand exactly what they are asking for. But we remain an exciting country. We are, and we as a law firm are certainly here to help you at any point in time whenever there are any questions. With that, I will stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kasturi. That was, for a vast country like India, to try to cover it in 20 minutes, I can imagine the Herculean problem that we have here. But I think that in a snapshot, you were able to capture most of the areas of concern, at least to give us an insight. And I'm sure that the delegates totally appreciate that. So afterwards, we've had a number of requests for the slides, and I will advise the staff that Kasturi would be happy to share them with you. So you will get a copy from our team later on. So with no further ado, I think we should open it up for Q&A, for questions. I see some already in the chat box. And what I'm going to do, so that some of our delegates can be more engaged directly with you and with Raj, I'm going to call them out and ask them to ask the question directly to you. So with no further ado, I'm going to start with Anu Bidani from STEM Minds. Anu, can you turn on your mic and ask your first question?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Christine. Kasturi, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I just had two questions that I guess are interrelated. So as Canadian companies coming in India, so does this mean that we should be charging GST based on the new regulations that have come in? And also if there's a particular resource that maybe where we could go to understand the tax rates a little bit better?
Sure, I'll answer the second one first, and I'm happy to share that with you. I am not a tax lawyer myself, so please forgive me for not knowing all of that info. But if you are looking to enter India and to sell in the Indian market or to provide services in the Indian market, then yes, GST should be applicable. It'll depend, of course, there are certain exceptions, and like I was mentioning, the slab at which you will need to charge it will depend on the exact type of good or service. But yes, I mean, if you are looking to sell in this market, yes, then GST does apply.
Okay. Is there like an authoritative website or something in India that I could explore to understand, where I can get the GST, the slabs and tiers and stuff like that?
I can send that to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll get it from Kasturi and we'll share it with everybody. So that's great. I'm going to go now to Karen Cross. Karen from Mimosa.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. We're very interested in India because we feel that they're very advanced in their digital health strategy. So my question may or may not be able to be answered within this context, but we know that there's also regions perhaps of the country that are perhaps more advanced than others. And if you knew what those digital health regions might be and have some suggestions on who we should target and where first.
On the who you should target, I'm happy to understand that a little bit more based on exactly what you do. But if you're looking at the regions, I would say all the tier one cities certainly have a lot more advanced basis, for this particular matter. For instance, where I am in Bangalore, which is in the south of India, a very big R&D hub. And of course, you will also see that in the Gurgaon side, which is up in the north. So I mean, various kind of pockets around the country. Also in the south, in Hyderabad, you will find that there are very many companies, both in the pharma space as well as in the clinical trial space and the diagnostic space, who you may want to meet. So please let me know what exactly it is that you do, and what is it that you would like to do in India, and I'll be happy to help in any way.
And, if we were going physically to India on this
Yes.
mission, we were planning to go to Bangalore first because it is a big tech hub, and that was where we were going to start off and then go up to Delhi afterwards. So Kasturi is in a very special place in India, and that was one that the foundation had targeted to take the delegates, because our delegation, Kasturi, fundamentally, we support women entrepreneurs who represent the underrepresented sectors. And so women with STEM backgrounds. So in this particular case, as you know, because from your presentation, we had targeted education technologies, healthcare and health technologies, as well as clean tech. So the majority of our women or delegates who have been chosen come from those three sectoral backgrounds. So
I do hope you have a delegation next year, and I will be very happy to host you all here.
Well, if things change, you never know. I've had discussions with the High Commissioner of India and of our High Commissioner in Delhi over the last week, and everybody's, of course, pushing to get people on the ground and whatnot. So we all have our fingers crossed. So hopefully, I would love to go to Bangalore. AW and I were planning to go there in March 2020. We're just about to hop on a plane, and the bang pandemic happened. So anyway, we do as well hope, because I know the Canadian government too is extremely interested in the Indian market, and I think you'll see some things coming through in the next year, which will be very promising for the Canada-India relations in technology and business overall. Now, I'm going to go back to one question I think that Anu had indicated. I'll ask that question for Anu. But in general, I think for the benefit of all the delegates, could you speak to what is the, in your view, your opinion, the acceptance of foreign companies offering solutions over homegrown companies? Is it acceptable? What's the level of acceptance or welcoming of foreign companies with similar solutions?
I mean, so that's a very good question, but I will say that in India, it's really not about who owns the company. It's about what is the service that you're willing to provide, and really the price point. Because as a consumer in India, value for money is something we are taught from perhaps the day we are born. So for us, if we see the differentiator, in the product, in the quality of the service, accompanied, with the right price, then we are absolutely going to pay for that. It doesn't matter whether it is, Indian owned or non-Indian owned. And you will see that a lot of startups in India that were majority owned by Indians have slowly, been owned by foreigners. And there is absolutely no kind of issue in the mind of the consumer on this particular point. Now, I will certainly add that the government's perspective has been that anything made in India does get the extra push, right? So if you are in India, you are developing employment here, you're set up a factory here, those things do play a very, very important role.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in your presentation, you mentioned early on that finding perhaps a partner or a collaborator or opening up a LLP or what have you is the best way to go. And certainly over the 5 trade missions that we've organized for the foundation, that's a message that comes through from every jurisdiction. In terms of if our delegates are to find a partner on the ground, and this is what we're pushing as well, would they be would they be able to access any of the funding? Let's say in your slides, you showed the amount of money investments on the healthcare sector from the Indian government, or education technologies or education sector. So
Yes,
if they
yes.
partner, then they would be eligible to apply or have
Yes.
access to that funding.
Yes,
as well.
I mean, each kind of funding or project from the government will have its own set of requirements. But in general, if you have set up a company here and there is a long-term plan to be in India, then certainly, you know, you would be eligible for a lot of schemes of the government. But if you look at the private funding, that's completely based on product. We have a huge scale of venture capitalists, you know, based in India, based in the US, you know, based anywhere in the world really, who have funded startups here. So, you know, that access to that money is just completely based on what you can sell as your business plan and model. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, of the 40 unicorns you talked about in your presentation, and we watch it very closely. We're watching India's unicorns all the time. In fact, for our official program on the mission, we were able to secure Miss Upasana Thakur, who is the co-founder of MobiQuick, which is a unicorn in India. And
Yes.
so we thought that bringing her on to speak to the women during the mission would be an inspiring story of her journey to scale her company to become a unicorn. So we've got one of your 40 that's going to be speaking.
Wonderful.
So we're really excited about that. Yeah. Well,
and that's a fantastic space. I mean, the fintech market in India has just completely changed. You know, a lot of the change was sparked by the demonetization that happened in 2016. But really, I don't think it has been so much about that. I think the consumer and, you know, their spending habits have drastically changed over the course of the years. And so therefore, you know, the whole wallet space, the whole digital banking space has really changed the way in which, you know, we do our shopping, we do our regular day-to-day activities. So she should be a fantastic person to speak to that.
Great. The other person that we have from India that we just secured this morning, as a matter of just before coming on this call, is the new head of Shopify, a woman.
Okay.
Yes, I think her name, it's a long name and I just missed it. I'll think of it. But anyway, she comes from background, very strong background, also in the fintech area with Paytm. She worked at Paytm, Alibaba, as well, Alibaba India, and has a tremendous background. So I think Shopify is really looking forward to a new, you know, innovative surge in opening up in India. So we're looking forward to her comments too, because she will be able to talk both about the Canadian side as well as the Indian part. So okay, you mentioned.
Can I ask a question, Christine?
Sure, absolutely.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Christine and Nadine, AW, Naneko. I've been fortunate enough to be on a couple of these missions, and I'm extremely excited about coming to India in person, hopefully soon. My name's Susan Blanchette of Originaire. We make air purifiers, very unique air purifiers with genetically enhanced plants. But as you can imagine, it's hardware. We need to find a manufacturing partner in India. Like, we're not going to ship them. We believe in environmental, ESG, keeping the supply chain close. How long is the process? Like, I too want the long trust building of confidence. When I'm starting a business, it's very daunting to come from Canada to India and think of getting into business quickly. How long, like, would it be a year that you start dancing with different manufacturers that you might want to get into business with?
I mean, there's no kind of a definite time frame that I would put on it. But if there is somebody who you know who is a mutual kind of a connection, then certainly it's easier to get that process going. I mean, I would say, given the sector that you are in, you know, it may take a little bit more time, because manufacturing in India is still, you know, is still a very promoter-driven kind of an economy, and it's very male heavy. So a lot of these businesses, and I'm, you know, I'm speaking frankly here, you know, they take a lot more time to get to see a woman at the other side of the table. So, you know, that's a little bit of an added issue. So if you potentially have a delegation like this, I think that process just makes it a little bit easier, because then they see you as part of a larger ecosystem and things like that. I mean, if you're dealing with a completely, you know, software startup and things like that, then they're very savvy, because, you know, many of them have studied in the US, they work there. So there's a difference in culture between the manufacturing brick and mortar type of work and then the software type of work.
So what I'm hearing is it's good to be as part of the delegation and
Yes,
and get introductions through a delegation, and then have counsel in India to represent you as well.
yes.
I think, Susan, for your benefit, you know, our trade minister is going to open up our mission. She's been a part of our mission series, and she's very excited about India. So with having a minister, and we're also getting a video message from the Indian Minister of Commerce. And so those kinds of things just raises the profile of the delegation. And so with that, you can use that to probably get better access or get faster access, you know, or responses. I have a question here. Some of our delegates are already into drafting contracts with partners in India. And if you can, Kasturi, speak to the jurisdiction for dispute resolution, because we faced a similar situation where the contractor wanted to have the dispute resolution on the contract done in India, whereas, you know, if we're doing it from over here, of course, we would want to be within our own jurisdiction. So could you do that, Kasturi?
Sure. So no, that's a very good question, and one that we are asked a lot when a lot of the companies want to enter India and negotiate contracts for the first time. Well, one thing I would certainly say is that look at the governing law as in Indian law. I think that just makes the contract a lot easier to enforce. If you're looking at the dispute resolution side, like I mentioned, arbitration is really the way to go. You could potentially look at arbitration in India. By and large, now that's become extremely savvy, and it's time bound. So the arbitrators in India are now forced to give an award within a year. So, you know, what used to happen earlier is that the arbitrations would take 2-3 years, you know, the arbitrators would not meet. And now when there is a timeline that is provided by the Act, the arbitrators basically don't take up a lot of arbitrations. Whatever they take up, they try and complete in a timely fashion. So you could certainly look at an ad hoc arbitration in India. If you wanted, and my advice is that if you're kind of entering India the first time, you could potentially look at the Singapore Arbitration Center, which is SIAC, because the Indian community is quite well versed with the way SIAC functions. They kind of understand the rules. The processes are quite quick. It's not very expensive. And the awards which are rendered by SIAC are easily enforceable in India. So, you know, so you have both options. But if you prefer to go in for a completely neutral venue, then SIAC is your best bet.
Okay, that's very helpful, because I think that's something that our delegates, when preparing their contracts, should be very mindful of, as we experienced it already ourselves. So that's good. Do we have any other questions for the delegates? Feel free, just put your hand up in the chat box and I'll call you out. I think that fortunately, Kasturi's presentation was so on point and focused a lot on the two of our key sectors of women that are going on the mission. It was very, very helpful. I learned tons already myself. So, well, if there's no further questions there, Raj, do you want to pipe in here and say a few words?
Sure. So I did want to just speak to a couple of issues from a Canadian law perspective that tie into some things that Kasturi mentioned. So the first is, Kasturi mentioned the Prevention of Corruption Act in India, which provides penalties for attempting to or actually bribing public officials in India. And it's important to remember that in addition to getting into trouble under Indian law, we have our own legislation in Canada that has extraterritorial reach. So we have legislation called the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act. And the way this legislation works is, even though it's a Canadian statute, it's Canadian law, you can get into trouble under Canadian law for bribing foreign officials, and it's very broadly defined. So giving any sort of benefit to a public official, even having a public official visit your operations in Canada and paying for that trip would constitute a bribe under our legislation. So it's very important to remember that. So I'll give you an example. Nico Resources is a case that's mentioned a lot. It's one of the first cases where a mining company in Canada got into trouble because this involved, if I remember the facts, it involved a contract with the Bangladeshi government. And in Bangladesh, they were trying to procure a contract for natural gas supply. So it's a Canadian company, Nico Resources, and they provided the Minister of Energy in Bangladesh with the use of an SUV that Nico already owned, and provided him with a trip to visit Nico Resources head office in Calgary. And then from Calgary, I think they provided him also with a trip to New York to go and visit his relatives. So the total consideration of all of these things together was in the neighborhood of $200,000. So it's a significant amount of money, but not in the context of the grand scheme of bribes, probably not the biggest bribe ever, right? And they got charged under the Canadian legislation, the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act. Nico pled guilty just based on how broad the definition of a bribe is under the Canadian law. And they were fined $9.5 million. And that's after a guilty plea. So this is, Nico cooperating with the government, and they got fined $9.5 million. So it's important to remember that the Canadian law has very broad reach. It's very broadly defined in terms of what a bribe is. And not only can your company face a fine, but the individuals who participated can face up to 14 years in prison under Canadian law. So it's a very, very serious statute with very broad reach and very harsh punishments if you're caught. So something that's important to keep in mind. It's not just the foreign law that applies, but Canadian law will also potentially land you in jail if, and it's something as simple as saying to a company in India, not a company, but a foreign official in India, hey, why don't you come and see our head office in Canada and we'll pay for your trip. That would land you in trouble under that act, okay? Kasturi also mentioned, several aspects of Indian tax law. In addition to their recent introduction of GST, it's important to remember that Indian tax law may result in you having capital gains tax payable in India, even if your organization is set up outside of India, okay? And Kosturi, maybe you can spend a couple of minutes just talking about the Vodafone case and the implication of that. But the bottom line is that even if you're not setting up your corporation in India, you're not dealing with shares or an organization in India, and you've set it up outside of India in what you think is a tax efficient jurisdiction like the Cayman Islands, for example, you may still find yourself being subject to Indian tax in addition to being subject to Canadian tax. Okay, so there's a potential for double taxation if you don't organize your affairs carefully. And one of the problems actually that our clients have faced in a couple of cases, which Trilegal actually helped us in one case on, was having the money that you put in as your initial capital grow in India and then having that money trapped. So when you decide to exit India, it may be easy enough to use your profits, reinvest your profits, and as Kosturi mentioned on capital conversion, the income account, generally speaking, is easily convertible, but the capital account is not. And so what that means in plain English is when you earn profits in your business in India, you can take those profits, you can dividend those profits to yourself, you can use those profits to reinvest in your Indian business. And that's quite easy to do. And you can convert from Canadian dollars to Indian rupees back to Canadian dollars because all of that is part of the income account. You're already paying applicable tax on it in India. And so you can convert that quite freely back and forth, okay? But when it comes time for you to exit India and you want to take your initial capital investment back out of India, that becomes much more difficult to do, and often that money gets trapped there. And so it's important to organize it correctly from the outset to make sure you're compliant with Indian laws and taking advantage of any relief that's available. So I'll stop there, and Kosturi, over to you maybe to comment on those items as well.
Sure. Sure. No, you make two very important points. The first one, of course, landed us in India in a lot of trouble because of the Vodafone case, where even though the company that was actually sold was based in Hong Kong, because all of the operations were Indian, the Indian government wanted a piece of that tax. That resulted in a long battle in our courts. Our courts did clear the stand of the companies, but unfortunately it led to the tax amended. And that basically now says that if there is any asset that is sold outside of India, but the substantial operations or the substantial underlying assets sit in India, then India has a right to tax that. So therefore, extremely important to understand the entire structure when you're looking to sell out. Understand, what is it that you're doing in India. Now, you could potentially set up a company in any other part of the world and just have a development center here. And that development center could, over the course of the years, gain a lot of value. You may have contracts here, etc., etc. So therefore, the operations in India could become extremely massive, although it just started out as an ODC. So important to remember that it's, one needs to check in with the tax lawyers to make sure that you have done this correctly. The second thing in connection with this particular issue is something known as GAR. So in India, we have a general anti-avoidance law that's come into place since 2017, I believe, where basically, a tax strategy whose only goal is to avoid tax is frowned upon. So the government will basically try and lift the veil on this structure to understand exactly why you have put it into place. So all arrangements with parties structuring through Mauritius or Singapore or any of these kind of tax-friendly countries need to be thought through quite carefully, and then ensure that when you are carrying on the operations in India, You are also simultaneously constantly meeting the test of substance if you are based in any of these countries. So that's very, very important to keep in mind as well. Sorry, Raj, what was the second main issue that you were referring to?
Having your money trapped in the capital account.
Right,
when you're
of
trying
course.
to pull out.
Right. So the repatriation of capital in India is a complicated one, and one that the tax authorities in India also closely watch, because they really want to see how you are taking the money back, what is the taxation around that particular method that we would try. So you could potentially look at a buyback of shares. Winding up in India is generally quite a complicated task. Over the last few years, there's been a new law, which is the bankruptcy code, that has eased out the process by a long bit, because one of the stories which I tell most of our clients is that there was a company that I started to work on in 2002 when I had just become a lawyer, and we didn't manage to wind up that company till 2017. So that's how long it would actually take to wind up a company in India, because of the numerous cases, and various tax authorities would want a piece of this, etc., etc. But now the law is actually much better. We're able to to complete the process pretty quickly, and when I say quickly, I mean about a year's time. So that's something that you need to watch out for, and then to be able to effectively take that money or the capital out. So most of the times we would structure the dividend payouts. We would try and find other means, services and other arrangements by which you could basically upstream the cash. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Kasturi. And it seems very daunting in any jurisdiction outside of our own. I mean, it's bad enough within our own jurisdiction within Canada, but when you're dealing with internationalization, and trade diversification, obviously, it's not just India, it's many of the jurisdictions that we travel to that have similar, or, that cover similar issues. So I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to go to Josephine. She has her hand up. Josephine, go ahead.
Yes, a pleasant good morning to all of you. Christine and team, thank you so much for organizing this very enlightening and very insightful presentation. Kasturi, I have a question. So as a background, I am the CEO and co-founder of Skills for Good AI. We are a SaaS and service platform that provides compliance services and products to SMEs that want to scale globally. And so we are very much into helping them comply with privacy and AI regulations around the world. And so my question is, what is the privacy and AI regulatory landscape in India in terms of whether or not it's keeping up with the EU and the US, where there is going to be like a coherence or a merger of regulations in this space?
We unfortunately are still struggling to pass the privacy bill. And that law has been going back and forth within the parliament, the very many kind of committees which exist. So unfortunately, short answer at the moment is that the privacy regime in India is very, it's sort of fixed up using very many parts of very many laws. So it's not a coherent piece of law. We're hoping that, that with this law, whenever it comes into the parliament for final vote, will actually become regime. It's based a lot on the GDPR. So again, there is a fair amount of responsibility on what we call the data fiduciary. So basically that is the person who gathers the data. And in some cases, we have actually gone further than the GDPR because there is an incorporation of privacy by the design. So, your model, your business model, wherever it might be, needs to kind of show that the design has kept in mind the aspects of the data subjects, their consent, their privacy requirements. So yeah, so a long way to get there, but certainly the intent is there. And if you really look at what's happening in both the EdTech and the healthcare space, the data that these companies are gathering, it's of tremendous value. So there is, and there has been many instances where there has been a misuse. So, the introduction of this law is going to be an extremely important one, but we really keep our fingers crossed that it happens soon.
Thank you so much, Kasturi. I know in the interest of time, I'm watching the clock here, but we could probably go on forever. I knew that this is going to be the most important training session. So thank you so much to Raj and to Kasturi for taking the time out of their busy schedules to address us today. I think that this is very, very important for all of the women entrepreneurs who are moving forward on this mission. And I'm still hopeful that with all the support that we're getting, that there will be some very good outcomes to come, and in part, they'll be attributed to you two because of the great advice that we got from you. For the delegates, same time tomorrow here. We have tomorrow a presentation on supports from governments, and we have our High Commissioner Designate, His Excellency, not yet, but because he still hasn't presented credentials in India, but Cameron Mackay, who is a really strong trade person and trade policy person. He will address you along with the government supports in EDC. So same time, same place tomorrow. And for the delegates who haven't yet registered for our CanWin, our Canadian Women's International Network, please do so on our website, because you will have access to rare resources, unique resources, accessible to information on our Asian markets that you would not necessarily get otherwise. So please register as soon as possible, because we are beta testing the portal with some right now, and it's almost ready to launch. So with no further ado, I'd like to thank our speakers once again, Raj and Kasturi. This was a fabulous session. Thank you ever so much, and hope that perhaps you can, we'll see you in person one day soon. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, delegates.